All right, let's get it started. Well, welcome everyone for the first TorontoJS Tech Talk online event. I hope you people are having a wonderful day so far. So before we start the presentation, let me give a quick introduction about TorontoJS community. We are a volunteer-run nonprofit corporation that aims to support all in their journey to learn and share their passion for JavaScript and, of course, by extension, software development. We have over 11K members on Meetup for virtual and in-person events, probably around 6,000 members on Slack, 900 plus on Guild, and 50 volunteers. And we're always looking for people to partner up with us. So if you're interested in partnering up, please send an email to the sponsor at torontojs.com. And first, let's show you guys the upcoming events. This one is for in person in Toronto on Thursday, February 8th. There will be a Toronto JS workshop. Will be hosted by Dale, one of our organizers. And the topic will be quick accessibility tips for devs. And the example will be cats and coffee. So if you're interested in cats and coffee and accessibility, please make sure to scan the code right there to RSVP. The seats are limited, so you better be fast. And now, one of the most important thing about this event and Toronto JS community in general is code of conduct. We are dedicated to providing an abuse-free, harassment-free event experience for everyone. And we do not tolerate abuse, harassment, or intellectual elitism in any form. For full details, you can find at the link here. And like if someone is harassing you in DM or anything, make sure to contact me, Sammy, Ken, and our volunteers Dale. And also you can also report abuse here at the link over there. And that's it for the introduction. So if you want to be more involved in Toronto JS community and connect with the fellow developers, make sure to scan the QR code here. All right, without further ado, let's move our attentions to Ken, and he will give some background and introduction about our speaker for today.
Hey everyone, my name is Ken. I'm a volunteer for TorontoJS. I'm also a co-organizer for this event. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. I'll keep it short. I'd like to introduce my friend and mentor, Andre. I met Andre about over a year ago, and Andre has been a mentor to me. He's also been an excellent mentor to many of people I call my friends, mentoring us on every Monday throughout the year on a variety of topics, taking us on adventures we never imagined. One thing I really love about Andre is that he's really passionate and he loves coding. And when you have the opportunity to learn from him and code with him, it's always a lot of fun. Andre has been particularly vocal and passionate about a topic for the last little while. And I don't think he's wrong. If you haven't noticed yet on a React documentation, they now recommend that you use one of two frameworks. And one of those frameworks is Remix. And so tonight, I'm excited to learn more about Remix and Audrey's current passion, and I suspect probably for the foreseeable future. So, Andre, thank you very much for being our first guest for this event. I'd like to hand over the mic to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Ken, for the nice words. I'm really happy to be here today. Let me start the slideshow already. Can you all see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, so I would love to also see the chat on the side. So let me move that over here. Sweet. Okay. So looks like in chat that most of you are actually also from Toronto. So hey, from the Bay Area in California. I hope the weather isn't too bad right now and that you're having a good time. My name is Andre. I'm originally from Germany, so I know everything about bad weather. But now I moved to the US and I'm currently working for LinkedIn. And as Ken mentioned, I tutor aspiring developers every Monday in a weekly meetup. And yeah, I love building websites. And today I want to talk about Remix to some extent. We're going to use Remix. I'm actually planning to code a little. But more importantly, I want to talk about web standards and a simpler mental model for building websites. And I'm gonna basically spoil the whole talk already by showing you exactly what I mean. And then we will come back and kind of like get back to this at the end. So with Remix on other like of today's full stack web frameworks, you can kind of build or work with a simpler mental model by first starting to work without JavaScript and then only adding JavaScript to enhance the experience. And we can talk about step 3 in a little bit. And these three steps, as you see them here, I have them from Ryan Florence, one of the creators from React Router and Remix. But yeah, first of all, the first thing maybe some of you notice is that working without JavaScript is kind of counterintuitive, as many of us are probably considering themselves JavaScript developers or React developers, right? So like, obviously we're using JavaScript. What do you mean by not using JavaScript? And I love JavaScript and I want to build with JavaScript. So let's uncover what I mean and how this all ties together. Cool. But before we start, I want to give like a little history lesson about the web and give a motivation how we get there. But before I start, does any of you know about the concept of Lüften? I wrote it in the chat. Anybody heard that before? It's a German word. Nope, nobody knows about Lüften. It has kind of been a meme in the last weeks or so on TikTok and Reels, so maybe you come along and Lüften meme. So basically in Germany, we have this concept called Lüften, where basically your parents stand up in your house and be like, we have to do Lüften now. Or your teacher in school is like, it's Lüften time. And then they open all the windows, even in the winter, and let on the fresh air to kind of like get rid of the moisture, get rid of like some bacteria, right? Like get fresh air in so you can focus again on your homework or whatnot. So this is our concept of Lüften. And if you have the opportunity right now to lift and get some fresh air and maybe stand up, relax a little bit, then I can highly recommend you to do so that we can all focus on this talk and have some fun. If you are brave enough, feel free to interrupt me at any time and ask questions. As Ken mentioned, I do tutoring, so I'm very much used to people just asking questions and then we go from there. But also feel free to just put them in chat and I will have an eye on it and try to answer them as we go. So you don't have to wait until the end. If something is unclear, please just scream what, and then we will figure it out. Cool. Cool. So HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Most of you are web developers. Are there any no web developers in here? Most of you are probably familiar, web dev, that we build our websites with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And that websites run in a browser on the client, right? Wherever our users are, they open a browser, they visit us, but then the website actually is on their device. But for that to work, they have to first reach out over the internet and talk to a server or a web server. And the protocol they're using is on top of the internet and a lot of protocol layers, they're using HTTP. As web developers, right, we have to be familiar with all of this. And most of the times there's also data storage involved, right? We have to persist our users' data, store their, I don't know, their age, their email address, if they signed up for a newsletter, right? Like all that data has to live somewhere. So as web developers, we have to work with HTML, CSS, JavaScript. We have to know the browser's APIs, right? How to manipulate the DOM, how to control the webcam and show the users which files they want to upload, right? Like all these browser APIs. But we also have to operate on this mental model of the client communicating to the server. And we even sometimes have to implement our own web servers, right? Or configure them. And we have to know about HTTP for cookies and caching, and just because that's the protocol that the web operates on. And sometimes, or even more often these days, we have to know about data storages, right? And have to configure them ourselves. We have to talk to a database. We have to write SQL queries. So congratulations if you're a web developer, you're also a full stack developer, right? Even 15 years ago, building for the web meant you had a web server where you wrote a server-side language like PHP. And then from there, you generated your HTML. Could have been static pages, but it could also be already server-side rendered with PHP. And then you serve that to the client. So by default, we are full stack, and we have to have this mental model in our head while working on building websites, that we have a client and a server. Cool. So if you don't mind, let's jump right into the code. I have a Remix app here, but we don't have to go too wild. The only thing that is important to us is that we're actually running an Express server. So in JavaScript, somewhere on the internet, we have a server running using Express.js. So it's a Node.js runtime using the Express library. And we have this thing here where we tell Express to serve every file that is in the public folder, just as static files. And go there. That is the Remix app running, and now we're serving a static file. So this has nothing to do with Remix. It's Express.js serving a static file called newsletter.html. And we have a form here, right? So if we go back, we see we have a form that posts some data with an email address and a submit button or subscribe button. And then what happens if we do that? We go back to our Express server. So this is the server of our client server model. And we see here that on app.post, when there is a post submission to newsletter.html, then we redirect the user to success.html. So basically, we just redirect them using HTTP, the protocol, to a different static file. And we console log that body just for funsies. Okay, so if we do that, and I put in my email address here and click subscribe, then you see that the URL has changed because there was an HTTP redirect response telling us to go to this different file. And if we look in the server logs, we see that my email address was logged here. So go back to the slides. No JavaScript involved, just a web server. Let's go back here. Just a web server serving static files, not even CSS and JavaScript, just HTML, to our client's browser. And the browser, the HTML document uses the browser API form submission to go over HTTP to submit something to the server, which was my email address, whereas the server then said, sweet, let's redirect you to another page, and then that page was loaded, right? So when you ask yourself, what would the browser do? It's really about this.
में जा रहा है तो वो बंदों को क्यों ही बुलाएगा
That's not a language I understand. But I think that was probably an accident, another question. Okay, never mind. So this is basically when it comes about what would the browser do, or what are web standards, right? We're talking about this. What's the mental model of the browser? So without any JavaScript, before we start mapping things up with React, what happens is we submit a form, and the browser uses, the server uses HTTP to communicate back to the browser what should happen next. And these are really the foundations of development.
कुछ नया सुनाओ
Andre, I think there's a way to mute everybody in the room. I can see there's a lot of microphones that are still open. He may not even realize that he's not mute. Is there any way you can just mute him?
Yeah.
गाड़ी आने वाली है
Done. I mean, at least he's having a good time, so I'm happy for him.
I'd love to know what he's saying.
Okay, so what is this? It's a mobile phone. Oh my God, what happened? The web was happy. We were also having so much fun with forms and submissions and HTTP. And then native apps came around. And what is the difference between a native app and a website? Every time you visit a new page on a website, on that first navigation, you first have to communicate to a server and say, hey, server, can I now download this page? Versus a native application, right? You download it once. All the pages of the native application are downloaded once when you download it from the App Store. So different kind of model how the application is downloaded or like served, because since you already have everything downloaded from the get-go in a native app, right? Any transition, any view transition on a native app is usually instant. So you click from you to do overviews to you to do details, and you don't have to talk over slow 3G on your train in Germany to a server that takes forever to respond. No, the response is immediate, right? So it's snappy. You can play with animations. And we were here building websites, and we were kind of like jealous, right? Like we were like, it's kind of snappy. We want this native look and feel also for our applications. And obviously there were a lot of different other reasons. Also, browsers 10 years ago weren't as good as they were today. So there was more a need to enhance the browser's capabilities with JavaScript. And all of that led to us, also obviously applications became bigger and bigger and bigger, and there was more complexity. But all of that led to us use more JavaScript on the client and break or prevent the default behavior of the browser to do our own thing instead, because we think we can do it better. And that's kind of where we started noticing, or like we started using the term web app, right? Like what's a web app versus a website? In my opinion, probably a common definition is just it's trying to be more native. It has more like a native look and feel. It's using having this like single page application feeling like a native application, using a lot of JavaScript on the client. So there's also this other thing that came in, that is that now that we have an iOS app and an Android app, and we have our website, that means for our not for our web server, but for our server, for our backend infrastructure in our database, there may now be different clients that we have to serve. So our server has to communicate with the iOS app, with the Android app, and with the website. So just having a web server that communicates over HTML form submissions may not be ideal, because iOS apps and Android apps don't really talk in form submissions. So we need a protocol, or like kind of like a communication mechanism that is more generic. And that's one of the reasons why REST and REST servers became very popular, is because you don't only support websites now, but you also support any kind of client that you want to support, right? So REST server is a server where you have API endpoints that receive JSON data and then return JSON data. Mostly JSON, but obviously you don't have to use JSON, but it's like this very generic format, JSON or XML, that you then can parse on the client, on your iOS app, on your Android app, on your website, and from there on then decide what UI you want to render. So instead of sending HTML to our website, we now decide to send JSON. Cool. So let's see how that looks like. So now we actually go into Remix in our Remix app. And we have a route here, which is a page called newsletter single page application. And everything we do here is just rendering a small component. It looks very similar to the newsletter we already showed before. We have a heading, we have a paragraph, and then we render a small form with an input where the user can input the email, and then we have a submit button that triggers the form. Cool. So let's see if we can reach that page. I have to exit out of my. So we want to go to newsletter SPA. Okay. And we should probably call this SPA so we don't get confused, because we're not using Remix right now. Obviously, we host this page in a Remix app, but as you can see here, we are all using native HTML. There's no Remix components involved yet. We're not taking advantage of Remix yet. We're just trying to play around a little bit. Okay, so what happens if we have a form in Remix that we submit to newsletter.html? If you do that, Same behavior as earlier, right? If we just submit to navigation.html, that will go to our Express server, to this endpoint, then we call it this way, that is then logging our email address and redirecting us to a static page. But obviously, that's not what we want right now. We don't want to do HTML form submissions anymore. We want to use JavaScript. We want to do fetch requests. We want to hit an endpoint that is maybe more like a REST API endpoint, right? So let's call the endpoint just newsletter. So this is our newsletter sign up. And we tell Express to parse incoming JSON submissions. Then we log it. And we don't redirect anymore, but we respond with, let's get up Copilot, do that. Respond also with JSON. Okay, so newsletter.spa or -spa. So what do we have to do here? By default, if you click on a submit button in a form, that will do a full page reload, right? You will see the loading indication up here, and it does a navigation and expects the server to tell you where to go next. But we don't want to do this anymore. Instead, what we want to do is prevent the browser's default behavior. So we get the event on submit, and then on submit, we say event.prevent default, right? We tell the event not to do what the browser would usually do, which is to submit the form, but instead we want to, do it ourselves with JavaScript. So we get the email from the form value. Looks good to me. Great. We can log it in case anything goes wrong, and then we want to do a fetch request. And we want to go to, whoops. This is our endpoint, right? And then we have to tell it to do a post. That looks cool. I love GitHub Copilot. So we do now a fetch request using fetch to our new endpoint. It's still a post because we're saving some data, right? Like every time you do like kind of a mutation, you want to use post, not get. Then we use our body and we stringify some JSON, which is just containing the email. This is what we expect on the server. And then we tell the server that this incoming request is JSON. And let's just also already await this. Just so we see what we get back. An alert? Nobody's doing alert anymore. Come on, GitHub Copilot. We're trying to be enhanced here. So what we want to do is get the JSON data and console log it. That looks good with me. All right. So back to our newsletter SPA page. We sign up. Nothing happened, but I think that's a good sign because we don't want to do a full page reload. Instead, we enhanced the experience with JavaScript. We see the console log here returns the success true, which we returned from the server. So if we go back to the server, we see that there was a post submission to the newsletter and it logged the email address. So congratulations, we just did the same thing with JavaScript that we previously did just with HTML without JavaScript. But what did we lose? We lost the nice indication of the browser that, like there was this like little pending indication up here from the full page reload, right? The browser showed the user that it was currently working, doing a navigation. It also redirected us to a nice page. Okay, that was static. But you see here that if you do it the SPA way, the form is not even cleared, right? So we have to do this by hand now. We have to do basically everything by hand now. And why is that? Because we robbed the browser of its default behavior. And the default behavior includes loading a new page with new data, asking the server where to go next, and showing a loading indication during the process, right? All of this is lost because we decided we can do better with JavaScript. And if we decide to do better with JavaScript, we are better better than what the browser would offer. So let's do that. We have to show a pending indication. So how do we do this? We are in React. So we probably have something like loading. And then while we are loading, we can maybe just do this here. Let's say. Now we show a new pending indication, right? If the user clicks subscribe and it's loading, then we change the text of the button to loading. So there's a visual indication that we got your thing, we take care of it. And before the fetch, we should probably set this to true. And after the fetch, we should probably set it back to false. And also keep in mind, error handling is not happening right now, right? So all of that thing we would need to do ourselves. What else? The user probably doesn't want to put in their same email address twice. So we probably want to also clear that, but let's see real quick. So I'm throttling myself right now. We are in slow 3G, so we can better see what's happening. So I click subscribe. See, now we have a loading indication again. And after that is done, it resets. So that's good. But we also want to reset the form, right? So how do we do that? We can probably just go in here. We have the form already. And after it is done, we probably want to form.reset. It's a handy little function on the form, HTML form element. And then we probably also want to show some kind of like success message. Right? Previously, we had a success page. Now probably want to do this inline. That looks good to me. So we want to set show success to false here, and then afterwards to true. And we are being very optimistic right now because we're not doing error handling. So let's refresh the page. Again, slow 3G, so it takes a second. Put in my email. We have a loading indication. The form clears, and then we have a success message. Cool. And now I would need to add like has error, right? You know this BL, most of you have probably worked with React. So you understand that we now have to manage all the state ourselves. And we probably want to clear it with a use effect at some point, or have a toast message, need a package. And you all understand that it's awesome that React makes this so easy, right? We have a state, we set a variable up here, or we call a function, a callback to set a new state, and it re-renders. And we have a new website or like a new UI with the updated information, and it composes beautifully through components. But we also have to do this, right? There. Okay. What's one more downside of this? Would this still work if we disable JavaScript? We have a form that submits to a REST endpoint that expects JSON data, and we submit in the onSubmit after we set prevent default. So this is all client-side JavaScript. Getting the right responses. Yes, so obviously this doesn't work because client-side JavaScript is not executable if JavaScript is disabled. So I disable JavaScript. I click submit. And oh. Aha, you see, I still had the old code in here that is like on submission, try to go here. But obviously, we don't really have that endpoint. So this doesn't exist, so it said 404 not found. So let's remove this and see what happens. but it's going to be the same. So the answer is it's going to be the same because it's going to trying to submit to this URL, newsletter SPA, but we don't have an API at newsletter SPA, right? We have an endpoint called newsletter. So now we're trying to submit there, and it says, well, this doesn't exist, method not allowed. Okay. I kind of spoiled the answer now. So can we make this work without JavaScript? Sure, we can add an action here where we want to submit our form. And maybe we call it newsletter also. And then in the server, we can say, where's our little endpoint? Post. Yeah, right. We can say we support both form submissions and JSON data submissions. And then that would work again. But let's be honest, who of you has done that before, right? We all have some fancy endpoint that expect more data than what we have in our form. We usually pick that with some React state and then submit it to some REST endpoints, and we wouldn't think about making it work without JavaScript. Also, maybe making it work without JavaScript doesn't seem like a priority. Like, after all, everybody of us has JavaScript enabled, right? But what about this? Let's enable JavaScript again. So obviously we all have JavaScript enabled, but let's say we are a first-time user. No, let's not say we are a first-time user. Let's say this is something like YouTube. We're very familiar with the page and we want to be fast, but we are on really bad internet. So let's hard reload the page. We are on bad internet. The JavaScript is still downloading, so we couldn't use our page yet. And there we go. So you see how long it takes to download all these JavaScript bundles for React app, even though we see the UI already, right? And that's something that actually happens a lot to me on YouTube. So like if I'm on bad internet, I see the page already. I want to search for a video, but the damn button doesn't work yet because the JavaScript is not loaded, right? So making it work without JavaScript also means to make it work before the JavaScript is ready, and all these other edge cases. Sometimes JavaScript breaks accidentally, right? Like it fails fetching and then your page is not usable. But more importantly, by making it work without JavaScript, hear me out, you actually create a simpler mental model. And that's what this talk is really about. So let's go back to our slides. Let's keep going. So every one of you has built a great React app before knows this, right? We have user facts and we have React query and we have other state management libraries on the client, and we prevent the default of form submissions and then use our own JavaScript to post and put and delete to REST APIs. And obviously there are reasons for that, right? We have REST backends now that are generic, reusable across different clients. So that's great. But it also kind of robs us from the access to HTTP. And what do I mean by that? See, if we only have the REST server and the REST server only responds with JSON, then we don't have a server that can reply with a redirect or can reply with HTTP caching headers, right? If we only have a server that is concerned about a generic JSON response, then from the two sides of our client-server model, the client and the server, we now only have the client left and not the server, because the server is responsible for replying with HTTP redirects and caching headers and cookies and making sure that we have the best possible experience on the browser and making it work without JavaScript. So this is kind of where full-stack web frameworks start to come in, right? We realize as an industry that it kind of makes sense to server-side render React. So we moved React also to the server. Then we realized that since our apps are already so big, we kind of want to use TypeScript. Now we have a REST server and a React app that both use TypeScript, but it's really hard to use types between them if it's not in the same app, right? We have maybe two different projects. And this is really where full-stack web frameworks try to like bridge the network gap and kind of create one project for both your React app on the client and your web server on the server. And the way I drew this here is that a full stack web framework is usually not concerned to replace your REST server. So if you're a bigger organization, you obviously will still have some backend services that talk to a database that are generic and communicate with different clients, your Android app, your iOS app, and your web application. But the full stack web framework is deploying or creating or can create an additional web server just for your website that has a server-side environment that then talks to your downstream services. So instead of two servers, you now have, instead of one server, you now have two servers. So there's a little bit of a complexity add. But for smaller projects, and if you only have a website, you obviously don't need the generic REST server. You can just have the website. Good question. So usually iOS app and Android, by the way, I'm a web developer, so I don't know too much about mobile development, but usually I would imagine that an Android or an iOS app would just communicate with the REST server directly. Or yes, you would then, if you say there's a need for a more dedicated server, you would then have your own Android server, your own iOS server, or like a shared server that is more responsible of creating a nice orchestration layer to prepare the REST responses in a way that is more suitable for these platforms. So yeah, and this drawing here, I didn't focus too much on that. You could totally also add their server, or you just communicate with REST, whatever makes more sense. Good question. Cool. So, but yeah, I'm more thinking about the web part of this, which is on the left. And that's where we now introduced full stack web frameworks like 1-2 years ago. Progressive web apps. Mark, you should have come to my my talk last Saturday. There we talked about offline support here, and it was also streamed on YouTube. I can share the link. But yeah, PBAs or like offline support and making it work, like making it even more native. That's a very different topic than what like Remix offers out of the box, but it's also very interesting. And there's a lot of movement right now, I feel like, and some interesting things. But yeah, I think PBAs is kind of its own on topic, so I'm not going to focus on that today. But yeah. Cool. So shall we check how Remix does it better? Yeah. All right. So I have another route here, just called newsletter, and now we are actually going to Remix. But so let's do what we already have again, but this time it's Remix. And let's see how both worlds come together, right? The old form submission and the new modern fetch request, and how we can make it all work with Remix. So currently it looks exactly like we had it before, just a form submitting to newsletter.html. So let's remove this and let's tell this form to just submit to the current URL, to the current route. And in our case, that would be /newsletter, because that's how we call the route. And then we also add an action function. So if you're familiar with Next.js, and there's something called server actions that is coming right now. So action is kind of like this. I honestly don't know if Astro has something like this, so I can't really think of a good equivalent. But basically, an action is where you would submit data to on form submission in Remix. So an action handles put, post, delete submissions on the server, on your web server for a given route component. So what did we do so far in our submission, right? We received an incoming request.
Sorry, in this case, you mentioned two web servers, REST service in the case. In this case, the post or the HTTP the HTTP action will be applied on what server? My API REST, or the this one at the middle that you mentioned before?
Good question. So let's look back. So Remix is basically covering the purple part. I should have probably mentioned that. So when I say Remix, I mean this purple part. Remix is something that you deploy on an existing server, but basically the Remix project would be something you deploy as a server somewhere. That would be then considered your web server. So when we go all the way back, right, we said we have a website talking to a web server, and Remix is covering exactly that part. It's the purple part. So when I say Remix here has an action function that you can export, that action function is something that runs on your web server. Let me see. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks.
Of course. Okay. So Remix concerned this purple part here. The REST server is very much optional, obviously, right? I just try to paint a story here. Obviously, if you would try Remix out for the first time, all you would have is the browser, the server, and then maybe you can add a data storage yourself. But in a bigger organization, you most likely will have other teams that work on backend services that you then communicate with. Okay. So what am I doing? I'm having a little brain fog here right now. So we have an action function. Okay, I did it correctly. Oh, it's called request, not request. Oh yeah, okay. So we get, like, every time you have a form submission, every time you talk to a server, we have a request response model, right? The same was true for Express. If we look here in our Express post, right, we have a request, a response. In Remix, the request and response follow the fetch API, request response interface. So this is nothing Remix specific. If you Google MDN fetch API, you will find there is a request and respond object. And this is the one that Remix provides us. So every time there is a form submission to your server, you get the request object, which is something you just know from the web. Exactly, web standards, nothing new. We just learned the web standards here. And then you can do stuff with it. So for instance, you can say, hey, give me the form data. And I have to make this function async. Cool. So this is now the form data that was submitted. So that's very similar to what in Express you would say, hey, parse the URL encoded form data, and then you have it in your body. So very similar here, you say, parse the form data. And this is, again, this is, if there's even MDM reference, this is just web standard, right? This is part of the fetch API. So we get the form data, and then we can get the email by just using the form data API. Cool. So now we have the email. We can console log it now like we always do. And now, obviously, we can write to the database ourselves, call a downstream service with fetch, right? We can do await fetch, newsletter, and do what we previously did in our React app already, but this time we do it on the server, right? Like, you obviously, we can still talk to downstream services, but we also, since this is a server, we can talk here to the database. This is not running on the client, so we can really do whatever. And then, what do you want to do? Do you want to return JSON? That works in Remix. You can return a response object, which is just JSON data, and then you can read it in your component. Or do you want to do a redirect and redirect the user to success? So if you look at redirect, that's a little helper from Remix, but if you go to the source definition, okay, that is not very helpful. Sorry. Okay, let's try this again. But if you go to the implementation, nope. Okay, doesn't work. Anyways, this is nothing else than saying a new response where we want to go. So we do a 302 navigation, a redirect response, and say this is the new location. I'm not sure if it works this way, honestly. But you understand the point. I'm going to use Remix helper because I don't want to remember this every day, but you understand it's it's not some magic from Remix. It's just a small little wrapper, so I don't have to remember how the actual HTTP redirect response looks like. So, and then we can say, hey, let's go to success. Nice. Okay, we obviously need a success page here as well. So let's create a success route in Remix. And let's copy just the one we already have. Let's just do this here. So in Remix, we have a route-based, a file-based routing convention. So every file I put in the routes folder is a new nested route. And obviously you can nest them, you can create the hierarchies. But right now I just have a /success. And the default export is a component, and that's the component that's going to be rendered on that route. And now we have a little success page. Cool. So now, like back in the old days, we now have a redirect to a success page. Cool. So this is already Remix. So let's go refresh this page. Okay, we probably need to kill our Express endpoint. So usually you don't mess around with Express too much in Remix. So I'm just gonna delete our endpoint. That was also leading to /newsletter, right? So maybe that's why our little server got confused. I'm gonna remove this. It's still on slow 3G, so we better understand how our network is working. I really like doing everything on slow 3G, just to better understand what's loading. Okay, success not found. That's sad. Let's go back to newsletter. Let's disappear this real quick, refresh this 1,000 times. Okay, so let's try this. We do a navigation. This navigation ends up only in Remix, so we're not really ending up in Express anymore. We don't have an endpoint there. We submit this form to this page, end up in this action, should log the email here in our logs, and redirect to the success page, and we have our success. Oh, there's an S missing. Okay, I'm submitting. Ta-da. Good question, Marco. So the question is, how does Remix handle the head body HTML tags outside of the component? So when I was copy pasting the success HTML page, right, I only took the body, not the rest. In Remix, I think that's really cool. You have a root file, and here's where you render your app component. So this is the outer component of your React app, and you can see that all your HTML is within your React component. So you could use React to conditionally render something in here already. So all of this is in React, and in Remix you have full control. And the root is also just one route. So even here you can have an action like we had previously. You can also have a loader to fetch data already. So it's just part of your app. It's the most upperwards root route, basically. Okay, so that was a lot. Let's go back to our little beginning. So we just used Remix to implement a simple form that submits to an endpoint, and all of that works without JavaScript. Shall I prove it? If we go back to newsletter here. Disable JavaScript. So why does this work now? Because we basically just do a HTML form submission to a web server, right? No JavaScript included, and it worked. Ken says it. Ta-da! Okay, so a simpler mental model for building web apps. Make it work without JavaScript. Again, why is this a simpler mental model? Because if we talk about websites and if we want to really catch all the edge cases, loading indications, error handling, success responses, right? If you want to do that all correctly, there's so much code we have to write in React. And if we try at least a little bit more to focus on the actual model of the website, where you have a form where you capture all the inputs the user has to make as input fields. And then on submission, you parse them on the server and you do the validation over here mostly. And then you decide on the server where to bring the user next. You kind of like eliminate 99% of all the React states you need, right? And obviously this is not pretty, and I'm not going to stop here, by the way. So like, don't think this is how React Remix apps looks like. It's absolutely not. But we're talking about the foundation right now, right? Make it work without JavaScript. So this took us not long, right? No React state needed, no client-side JavaScript needed, and it works. So you can deploy this now, and on a Friday, be very relaxed that you have loading, error handling, and all of this built in through Remix and also through web standards. And if you want, you can call it a day and stop because the implementation is done. Give me 1 millisecond. I have to stop my Roomba because it's doing havoc in the other room. Okay, that's better. Sweet. Okay, so what's the next step? So next step is to enhance the experience with JavaScript. Obviously, we want a native look and feel, right? If we go back here, newsletter, not HTML, newsletter, slow 3G, submit. You see we're doing a full page reload, right? Like we reset the page state. We have to download the whole HTML again because we want to request a whole new page, right? This is not ideal, but it's a very beautiful baseline because it works without JavaScript and it works in the most simplest of ways, right? But then we may identify some pieces where we say, hey, these things could already be done on the client, or we can prevent a full page reload, right? So how does that work in Remix? Remix provides a form component. And if you use that form component, behind the scenes, Remix is now preventing the default on this form and making a fetch request. But since Remix is doing this, Remix already takes care of updating all the React state we need so that we don't have to have all that state ourselves. It's behind the scenes now in Remix land, so we don't have to bother. And Remix does it in a way that even if we disable JavaScript, the baseline implementation that we already implemented still works. And there's a cool term for this if you want to, if you're interested and you want to learn more. So by providing a baseline implementation and then step-by-step building more without destroying the baseline implementation, we do progressive enhancement. And the idea is that even on the slowest of devices with the slowest internet, this still works and we provide a user experience. But if you have a bigger screen and you have a more powerful computer and a better internet connection, then we can provide you more and more features. If your browser supports JavaScript, if your browser supports, I don't know, real-time communication with WebSockets, right? Then we can also add that stuff so that you have a better experience. But if all of this is not available, we still have a default behavior for you, right? And you can still use our app. And I think that's very beautiful and also is something that really forces a simpler model on you because the first thing you do is you start simple. And most of us tend to overcomplicate things, which leads to bugs, which leads to shitty user experiences, to be honest. Cool. Okay, so now we have Remix form in here. We just changed form to form, uppercase, lowercase to uppercase. So I think we still have JavaScript disabled. Yes. And it still works because Remix is able to fall back, which is awesome. But then obviously most of us have JavaScript enabled. So let's look at that as well. JavaScript is enabled. We subscribe and it still works. Kind of. Having some weird issues here. That's probably, that looks like a Chrome extension. Okay, let me quickly no throttle. get the latest from the server, subscribe. There we go. Okay, so I'm pretty sure that that server is just a little slow here. It's more throttling. Okay, so with JavaScript, it also still works. Sweet. And now we can enhance the experience, right? So we already did this because now we avoid the full page reload. Let's do that one more time with slow 3G. We are now on slow 3G. I am putting in my email. I click subscribe. You see there is a network request, a fetch request to newsletter. Here. We already submit our email the way we did earlier, but there's no full page reload. So we're doing a client-side navigation now with Remix. So Remix is obviously able to do everything you would expect from a great React app, from a single page application, from today's modern frameworks. But even if things go south and there's no JavaScript, it still works. And the reason I love this is because it really enforces us to start simple, or it allows us to start simple and go from there. And then Remix obviously has all the things you expect. That's not what I want. Navigation. There we go. So navigation is a singleton that Remix provides us, that if you submit a form, Remix will set the current navigation state of the page in the singleton and the state we have access to this. So at all times, we know if the page is loading, submitting in a form, or is being idle. So everything we did here with this stuff, we can still do in Remix, but this time we don't need all these crazy React states and have to life cycle them ourselves, but we fall back and let Remix handle that. And more importantly, let Remix handle all the nasty edge cases that, to be frank, we would never do because we are lazy or we don't know about them, or we have already 10 more other things to do, right? I personally, for instance, never abort a network request if the user clicks the back button while the fetching request is still pending, right? Like these kind of edge cases is something I'm happy a framework does for me. So now in our button here, we can obviously still say if the navigation state is not, or let's say, actually let's do it like this, is submitting, then loading, otherwise subscribed. There's some better ways to do this. We don't have to go too deep into this today. Cool. Newsletter from Remix. JavaScript is enabled. We are on slow 3G, on very slow network. I put in my email. You see it's showing a loading indication. We navigate to a different page. We obviously don't have to navigate to a different page. We can also obviously have a JSON response here. Read that JSON response in using the action function hook. Yes, that works. Yeah. And then here, type of so this is how we tell TypeScript the type of this action data. So we know it returns either JSON or undefined. And that's what I meant by easily sharing TypeScript types between your backend and frontend, right? So like this is a different environment, right? Like this is running on the server. This is running on both the server and the client, depending on server or client side rendering. But I hover over here and it tells me exactly what the backend is supposed to return, right? And doing that in a non-full stack web app is really painful and requires code generation or like a submodule and a lot of alignment between the two pieces and the two projects. Whereas here, I say, hey, this is the return type of this thing, and I have my beautiful TypeScript types here. So let's check this one last time. And then we are done. My email, I subscribe, loading. It submits to the server with a fetch request because JavaScript is enabled. The action function returns JSON. Remix understands it returns JSON and not a redirect, and Remix will make sure to provide us the action data through this hook. and we can do exactly what we did with our React SPA. But we didn't need any client-side state ourselves. We're just using hooks to read data. And obviously reading is way less on complexity than making sure it's always reset correctly and doing all of that stuff, right? And the beautiful thing is it still works without JavaScript and falls back to the basics. All right, where's my slides? Cool. How are we feeling? Tired? A lot? More questions? Anything we should dive into? Is step 3 something we should discuss? Any other things that would be more important?
Andre,
Yes.
so like, are there challenges that Remix is facing that they're kind of working on now? Or like, do you think that they're on a trajectory to become the dominant web framework?
So there is a lot of cool frameworks out there. I know Marco was saying they're already using Astro, right? So Astro is a fantastic framework that works very well for a lot of different use cases. Next.js and the implementation of React Server Components is super cool. Svelte has some fantastic features, right? Svelte Kit, I think it's what it's called, is the full stack web framework in the Svelte world, is doing some very similar things to Remix. Solid and Solid Start are cool. So like, we are very blessed these days as full stack web developers, and there's a lot of really, really cool solutions. I kind of like Remix take because, yeah, the simple mental model, but also you can find something very similar in Svelte Kit and in different technologies. So I feel like most of them are converging right now. So Next.js and Remix look more similar every day, but that may also change again. I think Remix is very attractive because there are millions and millions of React router apps right now around. And the migration pathway from React router, if you have a create React app with React router, to Remix becomes easier every day. And when I say easier, I mean it's incredibly easy and like straightforward, even for bigger applications. There's a very streamlined process how you step by step get to Remix. And I think that's just very dangerous for Next.js because obviously that is a huge advantage that Remix has as a framework. But I hope that both of them do well, honestly, because competition is good. So we can all decide what's best for our team and what we prefer, right? Like a lot of framework stuff is also just taste, and everybody's a little different or has different backgrounds in that regard. One challenge that Remix is working on right now is the implementation of React Server Components. So if you haven't heard of React Server Components, React is also obviously still changing a lot. And one thing that React started doing is have this new concept of potentially async components that only run on the server and never on the client. So very similar to what I just showed you with the action function, right? Which only runs on the server, never on the client, and where you can do database queries and all that stuff. That is something that is coming to React. And Next.js already has an implementation for that. And Remix obviously is also very interested in that React architecture. But I think the Remix team is still researching how they want, what's their take, their interpretation, their philosophy around React Server Components and what's the best way to implement this. I wouldn't say it's like a risk. It's just something the Remix team is thinking about how to do best. And I'm curious to see what they end up with, but honestly, I don't miss anything right now. Like React Server Components is not solving problems I have personally.
There seems to be a specific question in chat.
Yeah. Let me see if I missed anything. How would Remix make requests to load a video? Would Remix be an advantage in this case, or is Next.js should? So I think most use cases you can do with Next.js and you can do with Remix, and you will find plenty of good resources online how to do it. When you say load video, you probably mean you have a URL and you want to show that in a how you call that, in a video element, right? I implemented a cool little video course platform in Remix. I can plug it real quick. It's vilapilates.de. I built this for a friend from Germany, and we're selling Pilates courses online and track the progress the people have. So it's using Vimeo, I think, behind the scenes. I'm not entirely sure. But either way, like stuff like this, you will be able to do in any framework really. But I think it works very well with Remix. Yeah, I'm done. So there's this third step here. I just want to mention it. Move as much logic as possible to the server. So if you enhance stuff with JavaScript, you tend to also add client-side JavaScript back. And then the last step is basically just to clean up the code, because the bigger the JavaScript bundle, the longer it takes to download your website, the more complexity there is on the client, the harder it is to maintain your website. And generally, if you have to choose between the client and server, the default should be to move code to the server, because usually it's faster compute, it's closer to the source of truth. This is where your data lives, right? So you should make the business decisions there. All your validation security stuff has to live on the server, or at least you have to have duplicated logic on the server. So it makes a lot of sense to have the third step where you're done and you look over your finalized changes and maybe like your PR, and you just be like, is there anything I can move to the server and make the client even less complicated? And that's just the last step here. Yeah. So no more slides. We can go wherever now.
Okay, I think we can end the recording, or do we want to do a warm ending, Sammy? Okay, Sammy seems to be busy. So I'd like to thank our guest, Andre. Andre, thanks for the very interesting conversation talk. I'm looking to hearing more about Remix. I'm not quite finished your book. Just wanted to throw it out there. Although TorontoJS does not endorse products, I'm really enjoying your books on Remix. If anybody's interested, please check Andre out on Amazon. So we're going to be moving to a short networking session. Andre, would it be possible to maybe is the recording stopped, or
I can stop it now.
yeah, probably a good idea.